One full 100 samurai stood in formation at dawn. 99 swords rose toward the temple. One stayed low. The man who held it knew what would follow: disgrace, death, the erasure of his family name from every record. He lowered it anyway, because some orders, once obeyed, cannot be undone, and some silence, once kept, becomes louder than any scream. This is the story of the night before that dawn, and the choice that proved honor is not about following the code. It is about recognizing the moment the code has failed. In the autumn of the second year of Tenshu, a messenger arrived at Morimoto Castle carrying a letter sealed with black wax. Black wax meant one thing: a demand that could not be refused. Lord Morimoto Yasunaga read the letter alone in his study, then read it again. His face revealed nothing. 30 years of leadership had taught him to keep his reactions buried. But his hands, folding the paper with excessive care, betrayed him. The letter came from Lord Yuchi Tadamasa, his most powerful ally, the man whose 3,000 soldiers had saved the Morimoto clan during the siege of Kurohama, the man to whom Yasunaga owed everything: his castle, his domain, his son's futures. The debt was about to be collected. 6 months earlier, peasants in Yuchi's northern territory had revolted against a new rice tax. The revolt failed, as peasant revolts always do. The leaders were executed publicly, their heads displayed at crossroads as warnings. But some had escaped: 43 men, women, and children who fled south through mountain passes, seeking sanctuary anywhere that would have them. They found it at Renshō-ji, a small Buddhist temple 2 hours from Morimoto Castle, led by an aging monk named Tesshin. Tesshin had taken them and fed them, hidden them. And when Yuchi's agents came demanding their return, Tesshin had done something unthinkable. He had refused. Now Yuchi's letter was clear: the temple harbors traitors to my domain. I require proof of your loyalty. Raise Renshō-ji. Leave no survivors. Send me the monk's head and the ashes of those who defied me. Fail, and our alliance ends. Yasunaga sat alone for a long time after reading those words. The candle burned low. The shadows grew long, and somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rang its evening prayer, ignorant of what dawn would bring. Among the 100 samurai who served Lord Morimoto directly, Takeda Shiro occupied an unusual position. His father, Takeda Junichi, had been born a peasant, an Ashigaru foot soldier who carried spears for real samurai. During the Battle of Mizukawa, when the Morimoto lines broke and defeat seemed certain, Junichi had done something that changed his family's fate forever. He had picked up a fallen samurai's sword and held a bridge alone for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Long enough for Lord Morimoto's father to regroup his cavalry. Long enough to turn a rout into a victory. Long enough to earn a peasant something unheard of: elevation to samurai status. Junichi died 3 years later from wounds that never fully healed. But he died as Takeda Junichi, samurai of the Morimoto clan, with a family name his son could inherit. Shiro grew up carrying that name like a stone around his neck. He trained harder than the sons of established families, spoke less, obeyed more. He understood something they didn't have to understand. His position was borrowed. One mistake, one moment of impropriety, and the whispers would start. What do you expect? His father was a peasant. Blood tells. By 28, Shiro had become what his father's sacrifice demanded: a perfect samurai. Reliable, skilled, invisible. The kind of man commanders trusted with difficult tasks precisely because he never questioned them. He had never questioned anything, until the night he was summoned to the Great Hall with 99 others. Lord Morimoto stood before his assembled samurai in full formal dress, black silk hakama, the Morimoto crest embroidered in silver across his chest. His face was stone. His voice was calm. Tomorrow at dawn, he said, you will proceed to Renshō-ji Temple. You will surround it completely. No one leaves. On my signal, you will enter and execute every living person inside. The temple will then be burned. The words fell into silence like stones into still water. Shiro stood in the third row, his expression as blank as every face around him. But something cold moved through his chest, something he didn't have a name for yet. The temple harbors enemies of Lord Yuchi, Morimoto continued. By refusing to surrender them, the monk Tesshin has made himself and everyone under his protection traitors. The punishment for treason is death. This is justice. This is necessity. This is what our alliance requires. Our alliance. Shiro understood politics well enough to hear what wasn't said. This wasn't justice. It was payment. Lord Yuchi had called in his debt, and the currency was blood. Captain Iwamoto will command the operation, Morimoto said, gesturing to a broad-shouldered samurai at the front of the assembly. You will follow his orders without hesitation. Any man who refuses. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Will share the temple's fate. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone one might use to describe weather. Dismissed. Prepare your weapons. Rest while you can. The samurai filed out in orderly silence. No one spoke. No one looked at anyone else. It was as if the words had frozen something in the air, something they all preferred not to examine too closely. Shiro walked back to his quarters through darkening corridors, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. The cold thing in his chest had not left. If anything, it had grown heavier. Execute every living person inside. He had killed before. In battle, where enemies wore armor and carried swords. Where killing was survival, yours or theirs. This was different. He didn't know how yet, but he knew it was different. At 17, Morimoto Kazuki was everything a daimyo's heir should be. He had been trained in swordsmanship since he could hold a bakken. He could recite military strategy, compose poetry in classical form, and maintain perfect composure during the most tedious diplomatic ceremonies. What he had never done was watch men die. His father summoned him that evening, after the assembly had dispersed. You will accompany the operation tomorrow, Yasunaga said. It was not a request. Kazuki bowed. Yes, father. You will observe from the eastern ridge with my advisors. You will watch everything. You will not look away. I understand. Do you? Yasunaga studied his son with eyes that gave nothing away. When you inherit this domain, and you will, sooner than either of us might wish, you will face choices like this. Choices that have no clean answers. You need to understand what they cost. Kazuki wanted to ask questions. Why must the children die? Couldn't we simply return the refugees and spare the monks? Is there truly no other way? But he had been raised in this castle, and he knew the rules. Questions were weakness. Hesitation was doubt, and doubt in a future lord was unforgivable. So he bowed again and said only, I will learn what you wish to teach me, father. Yasunaga nodded, something unreadable flickering across his face. Pride, regret. Kazuki couldn't tell. Double quotes go rest. Tomorrow will be instructive. Shiro did not rest. He lay on his futon in the darkness, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the sounds of the castle settling into night. Somewhere, a guard called the hour. Somewhere else, servants whispered as they prepared for tomorrow's grim work. Execute every living person inside. The words circled in his mind like hungry crows. He had heard stories about Renshō-ji, a small temple, unremarkable in most ways, known mainly for its elderly abbot who had once been a samurai of some reputation. Tesshin, they called him, a man who had abandoned the sword decades ago for reasons no one quite remembered. What kind of man refuses to hand over fugitives when he knows the cost? The question wouldn't leave him alone. Before he fully understood what he was doing, Shiro rose from his futon. He dressed in dark clothes, not armor, just a simple traveling kimono. He tucked his short sword into his belt, leaving the long sword behind, and he slipped out through the servants' entrance, into the moonlit night. The temple was 2 hours away by the main road, but Shiro knew the mountain paths, and he was not going to be seen. He told himself he was conducting reconnaissance, assessing the terrain, preparing for tomorrow's operation. He told himself many things during that walk through the dark forest. None of them were the truth. The temple appeared suddenly, as if emerging from a dream. It was smaller than Shiro had imagined, a main hall of weathered wood, a modest pagoda, and a handful of outbuildings clustered around a courtyard of raked gravel. Paper lanterns glowed softly along the walkways, casting pools of amber light. And there were people, far more than he expected. Shiro crouched in the tree line, watching. He could see figures moving between buildings, monks in gray robes, others in peasant clothes. Through the open doors of the main hall, he glimpsed families huddled together, children sleeping on thin mats, women mending clothes by candlelight. These are the traitors we're meant to kill. A woman walked past, carrying a sleeping child against her shoulder. The child's face was peaceful, thumb tucked into its mouth. The woman looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair escaping from a hasty knot, but she moved with the careful tenderness of mothers everywhere. Shiro's throat tightened. He had expected something different. Rebels, perhaps, angry men plotting violence, something that could be called a threat. Instead, he found tired people trying to survive. "You move quietly," a voice said behind him, but not quietly enough. Before we continue, if you've felt the weight of this story so far, subscribe. It helps us bring the spirit of old Japan to more people who still believe in honor. And tell us, where are you watching from? Now, back to the story. Shiro spun, hand flying to his short sword, but stopped. The man standing behind him was old, 60 at least, perhaps more. His head was shaved, his robe simple gray cotton. He held no weapon, made no threatening move. He simply stood there, regarding Shiro with calm curiosity. "You're from the castle," the monk said. It wasn't a question. Shiro's hand remained on his sword. "How did you know I was here?" "I didn't. But these woods have been my home for 30 years. I know when something moves through them that doesn't belong." The monk tilted his head. "The question is why? The attack isn't until dawn. And you've come alone, without armor, carrying only a wakizashi. This isn't reconnaissance. How do you know about the attack?" The monk smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Lord Morimoto is an honorable man. He sent a messenger this afternoon to warn me, to give me one final chance to surrender the refugees. And you refused." "I refused." Shiro stared at him. "You know what will happen." "I know. You'll die. Everyone here will die. Because you won't hand over 40 peasants who rebelled against their rightful lord." 43, Tesshin corrected gently. "And yes, I know." The silence stretched between them, filled with cricket songs and the distant murmur of the temple's evening prayers. "Why?" Shiro finally asked. The word came out rough, almost angry. "What's worth dying for? What's worth getting all these people killed?" Tesshin was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned slightly, gesturing toward the temple. "Come inside. See for yourself. Then you can decide whether to report back to your lord, or whether some things are worth more than a clean conscience." Shiro should have refused, should have returned to the castle, reported the temple's defenses, prepared for tomorrow. Instead, he followed the monk through the darkened trees, toward the soft glow of paper lanterns. And with each step, he felt the ground beneath his certainty beginning to crack. The main hall of Renshō-ji smelled of incense and unwashed bodies, the smell of too many people into small a space for too long. Tesshin led Shiro through a side entrance, away from the main gathering. But even from here, Shiro could see them, families pressed together on thin mats, children curled against parents, elderly men and women sitting in stoic silence. 43, Tesshin said quietly. "That's how many fled Lord Yuchi's territory after the revolt. 21 men, 13 women, 9 children." He paused beside a screen, allowing Shiro a clearer view. "The revolt was over a rice tax, did you know that? Lord Yuchi increased it by 40% to pay for a new castle. These people were already hungry. The increase would have meant starvation. So they protested, peacefully at first, then less peacefully when peaceful was ignored. Rebellion is rebellion," Shiro said, but the words felt hollow in his mouth. "Is it?" Tesshin's voice remained gentle. "If your children were starving and your lord demanded the food from their mouths, would you call resistance rebellion? Or would you call it something else?" Shiro didn't answer. They walked deeper into the temple, past sleeping forms and whispered prayers. A young monk offered them tea, which Tesshin accepted and Shiro refused. "You asked why I won't surrender them," Tesshin said, settling onto a worn cushion in a small side room. "The answer is simple. Because Lord Yuchi doesn't want them returned. He wants them dead, publicly, as a message to anyone else who might think of resisting. You don't know that. I know exactly that. His messenger was very clear. Return them for execution." Those were the words. Not return them for justice. Not return them for trial. Execution. The verdict was decided before they ever fled. Shiro felt the cold thing in his chest grow heavier. Even so, what can you do? You're one temple. Lord Morimoto sends 100 samurai tomorrow. You cannot fight. You cannot run. All you can do is die. Yes, Tesshin agreed. All I can do is die. But how I die, that I can choose. They sat in silence for a time. Outside, the sounds of the temple continued. Soft footsteps, murmured conversations, a child crying briefly before being soothed. You were a samurai once, Shiro said. It wasn't a guess. He had recognized something in the way Tesshin moved, the way he held himself even now. I was. Tesshin's eyes grew distant. I served Lord Yamazaki in the northern campaigns. I was considered skilled. Perhaps I was. I killed many men and was rewarded for it. What changed? The question hung in the air. Tesshin took a slow sip of his tea before answering. There was a village, a small place, unimportant strategically. But our enemies had passed through it, and our lord believed the villagers had aided them. He paused. We were ordered to make an example. Shiro's stomach tightened. He knew what was coming. I followed orders. Tesshin continued, his voice flat. We all did. When it was over, 63 people were dead, men, women, children. The youngest was perhaps 4 years old. I remember her face still, the confusion in her eyes when I raised my sword. She didn't understand. How could she? The silence that followed was suffocating. I left that night, Tesshin said. Walked away from my armor, my name, everything. I wandered for years until I found this place. Built this temple. Thought perhaps I could balance the scales somehow, save enough lives to pay for the ones I took. He looked at Shiro directly, and there was no judgment in his eyes, only an ancient sorrow. I know what you're feeling, young man. The cold weight in your chest, the voice asking questions you're afraid to answer. I know, because I felt it too once, and I ignored it. And I have lived with that choice for 30 years. Shiro's hands were trembling. He pressed them flat against his thighs to still them. What would you have me do? He asked. Defy my lord? Betray everything my father died to give me? For what? 43 peasants I've never met. I would have you do nothing, Tesshin said. The choice is yours. It always is. That's the terrible truth we spend our whole lives trying to escape, that we always have a choice, and that every choice has a price. He rose slowly, joints creaking with age. Dawn comes in a few hours. You should return to the castle before you're missed. Whatever you decide tomorrow, I will not judge you. None of us can know what we would do until the moment arrives. Shiro stood as well, his mind churning. You speak of choice, but you've made yours. You'll die here, with these people, for nothing. The temple will burn regardless. Perhaps, Tesshin acknowledged, but perhaps not for nothing. Perhaps someone will see. Perhaps someone will remember. And perhaps, years from now, that memory will matter to someone facing their own impossible choice. He placed a hand on Shiro's shoulder, a gesture so unexpected that Shiro nearly flinched. Go now, and if you do come tomorrow with your sword raised, I will understand, truly. The system we were born into is heavy. Not everyone can bear to lift against it. The forest path seemed longer in the darkness returning. Shiro walked mechanically, his body finding the way while his mind churned with everything he had seen and heard. 43 people, 21 men, 13 women, 9 children, numbers. Just numbers. That's what they were supposed to be. But he had seen faces now. The mother with the sleeping child, the old man sitting in stoic resignation, the young couple holding hands in a corner, knowing these might be their last hours together. What's worth dying for? He had asked Tesshin that question. Now it echoed back, transformed. What's worth killing for? His father had killed for this clan, had died for this clan, had earned their family name through blood and sacrifice so that Shiro could stand among samurai as an equal. But would his father, the man who had held a bridge alone against overwhelming odds, would that man have raised his sword against sleeping children? Shiro didn't know. He had been young when Junichi died, and memories of his father had faded to impressions, rough hands, a quiet laugh, the smell of sword oil. He only knew what he himself could do, and with each step through the dark forest, the answer became clearer and more terrifying. The castle gates appeared through the trees, torches burning in their brackets. Shiro stopped at the edge of the forest and stood there for a long moment, looking at the walls that had been his home, the domain he had served faithfully, the life he had built through obedience and silence. Then he walked forward, gave the password to the guards, and returned to his quarters. Dawn was for hours away. He did not sleep. He knelt on his futon in the traditional position, hands on his thighs, spine straight, and stared at the wall where his swords hung. 2 swords, the mark of a samurai, the long blade for battle, the short blade for honor, for taking one's own life if necessary. His father's swords, the only inheritance that mattered. Every choice has a price. If he obeyed tomorrow, he would keep his name, his position, his life. He would continue serving the Morimoto clan, perhaps marry someday, have children, grow old in modest comfort. He would die as his father had hoped, a samurai, respected if not distinguished, but he would carry what he had done forever. He would see the mother's face in every woman, the child's confusion in every innocent. He would become what Tesshin had been, except Tesshin had at least tried to pay his debt. Shiro would just continue, pretending it hadn't happened, burying it beneath duty and routine until it poisoned everything from the inside. And if he refused, death, probably. His mother's disgrace. The Takeda name erased from clan records as if it had never existed. Everything his father sacrificed, annihilated in a single moment of defiance. For 43 strangers. For a principle that no one would remember. The candle beside him burned lower. The night deepened. And somewhere in those dark hours, kneeling before his father's swords, Shiro stopped asking what he should do. He started asking what he could live with. The answer, when it came, was not heroic. It was not noble. It was simply clear. Some things, once done, cannot be undone. Some silence, once kept, becomes complicity. He would lower his sword, not because he was brave. He was terrified. Not because he was righteous. He was full of doubt. But because he had seen those faces, and he could not pretend he hadn't. He could not control what happened after. Could not save the temple. Could not stop 99 other samurai. He was one man against a system designed to crush men like him. But he could choose who he was at that moment. And that, only that, was still his. Outside, the first gray light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky. The courtyard filled with silent men. 100 samurai gathered in the pre-dawn darkness, their armor gleaming dully in the torchlight. Servants moved among them, checking straps, adjusting helmets, offering water that few accepted. The air smelled of metal and oil and the particular tension that precedes violence. Shiro stood in his assigned position, 3rd row, left flank. His armor felt heavier than usual, though he had worn it dozens of times before. His long sword hung at his side, freshly sharpened the evening before by a servant who had no idea what it would be used for. No one spoke. The silence was not peaceful but compressed, like air before a storm. Captain Iwamoto walked the lines, inspecting his men with the practiced eye of a career soldier. He was 53, gray at the temples, with a face carved by decades of duty. He had served the Morimoto clan since before Shiro was born and had never, in all those years, questioned an order. He stopped before Shiro. "Takeda, sir." Iwamoto studied him for a moment, a brief, appraising look. "You seem tired. Did you sleep?" "Enough, sir." The captain grunted. It might have been acknowledgement or skepticism. "Stay focused today. This action requires precision. We encircle, we enter on signal, we complete the objective. No hesitation, no complications." "Understood, sir." Iwamoto moved on. Shiro exhaled slowly, willing his hands to remain still at his sides. No hesitation, no complications. As if they were discussing a training exercise. As if the objective wasn't 43 people who would be breathing 1 hour from now and dead the next. He looked at the men around him, faces he recognized from years of shared service. Yamamoto, who had a young daughter at home. Endo, who wrote poetry in his spare time. Fujita, whose wife was expecting their first child next month. Good men. Ordinary men. Men who would kill children this morning because they had been ordered to, and who would go home afterward and eat dinner and sleep beside their wives and never speak of it again. Was he any different? He had followed orders his entire life, had built his identity on obedience, on being the samurai his father's sacrifice demanded. What makes this order different from any other? The faces, the mother with her sleeping child, Tesshin's ancient sorrow, and beneath it all, a question he could no longer avoid. If the code demands this, what is the code worth? From the elevated platform at the courtyard's edge, Kazuki watched the samurai assemble. His father stood beside him, dressed not for battle, but for ceremony. Formal robes, the clan crest displayed prominently. This was not his fight. Lords did not bloody their own hands. They gave orders and observed outcomes. Watch their discipline, Yasunaga said quietly. 100 men moving as one. This is how power is maintained, through unity of purpose, clarity of command. Kazuki nodded, though his throat felt tight. He had prepared himself for this, had told himself it was necessary, that leadership required difficult decisions, that he would need to understand such things when he inherited the domain. But standing here, watching real men prepare for real killing, the abstractions crumbled. These are our samurai. In an hour, they will slaughter monks and peasants' children. He thought of the servant boy who attended him, Taro, 8 years old, quick to smile. There would be children Taro's age at that temple. Children who would wake to screaming, who would die without understanding why. This is what ruling costs, he told himself. This is the price of alliance, of security, of the domain's survival. The words felt hollow, like something memorized rather than believed. His eyes drifted across the assembled ranks and stopped, without quite knowing why. On a samurai in the third row, Takeda Shiro, he knew the name vaguely. Son of the Ashigaru who had been elevated. A reliable man, by all accounts. Nothing remarkable. Yet something in his stillness caught Kazuki's attention. The other samurai stood with the blank composure of men who had set aside their thoughts. Shiro stood like a man holding something heavy inside him, using all his strength just to remain upright. He doesn't want to do this. The realization arrived with unexpected force. He's going to do it anyway. Because that's what samurai do. That's what we all do. Kazuki looked away, disturbed by what he had seen, or perhaps by what it revealed about himself. The column moved out as the first gray light touched the horizon. 100 samurai in ordered ranks, armor clicking softly, footsteps muffled on the dirt road. Behind them, a handful of Ashigaru carried torches and the materials for burning, oil, kindling, the tools of destruction. Shiro marched with the others, his body performing the familiar movements while his mind remained elsewhere. The path wound through rice paddies silver with morning dew, past farmhouses where peasants were already awake, tending fires and preparing for the day's labor. They stopped and stared as the column passed, 100 armed men moving with grim purpose. None asked where they were going. They knew better than to ask. Do they know? Shiro wondered. Do they know what we're about to do? Will they hear the screams from their fields? The man beside him, Endo, the poet, walked with his eyes fixed forward, his face carefully empty. They had served together for 6 years, had shared meals and stories, and the small intimacies of military life. Yet Shiro knew nothing about what Endo was thinking now, whether he felt anything at all or had simply sealed that part of himself away. This is how it works. We don't speak. We don't question. We march, and we do what we're told, and afterward we pretend it was necessary. The road began to climb. Through the trees ahead, Shiro could see the first glimpse of Renshō-ji's pagoda, its weathered wood catching the early light. 2 hours ago, he had walked the same path in darkness, had sat with Tesshin and looked into the face of what was coming. Now he returned with 99 other swords, and the weight in his chest had become almost unbearable. The temple appeared peaceful in the morning light. Smoke rose from the kitchen building where someone was preparing breakfast. A monk swept the entrance path with slow, meditative strokes. Birds sang in the ancient pine trees that surrounded the compound. It looked exactly like what it was, a place of prayer and refuge, untouched by the violence moving toward it. Captain Iwamoto raised his hand, halting the column at the tree line. 1st and 2nd squads, circle north. 3rd and 4th, south. 5th squad remains here with me. Complete encirclement, no gaps, no escape routes. Wait for my signal. The samurai dispersed with practiced efficiency, flowing around the temple like water around a stone. Within minutes, Renshō-ji was surrounded by a ring of steel. Shiro found himself positioned on the eastern side, facing the main hall where he knew the refugees were gathered. Through the open shoji screens, he could see movement inside, figures rising, beginning their morning routines, unaware of the death that encircled them, or perhaps aware. Perhaps Tesshin had told them. Perhaps they had spent the night saying goodbye to each other, holding their children, praying for miracles that would not come. Which is worse? Shiro wondered, to die in ignorance or to spend your last hours knowing. A child's voice drifted across the courtyard, high and clear, asking a question Shiro couldn't quite hear. A woman's voice answered, gentle, patient. Shiro closed his eyes. I cannot do this. The thought was so clear, so absolute, that it startled him. Not should not or don't want to, cannot. As if his body had made the decision independently of his mind, had simply declared that this action was not possible. He opened his eyes and looked at his hands on his sword. They were steady now. The trembling of the night had passed, replaced by a strange calm. I will lower my sword. Whatever comes after, I will lower my sword. It was not a brave decision. It was simply the only one left. Captain Iwamoto's voice cut through the morning air. Renshō-ji Temple. By order of Lord Morimoto Yasunaga, you are commanded to surrender immediately. All persons inside will exit the buildings and kneel in the courtyard. You have until I count to 100. Silence from the temple. Then, slowly, the main doors opened. Tesshin emerged first, wearing a simple white robe, the color of death, of mourning, of acceptance. Behind him came the other monks, 7 in all, walking with the measured calm of men who had made their peace. Then the refugees. The men first, some standing straight with defiant dignity, others hunched with fear. Then the women, several carrying children too young to walk. Then the older children, clinging to their mothers' robes. They filed into the courtyard and knelt in rows, facing the ring of samurai surrounding them. 43 refugees, 8 monks, 51 people who had perhaps an hour left to live. Shiro watched them kneel and felt something shift inside him, some final barrier crumbling away. These are the traitors. These are the enemies worth dying for. An old woman, her back bent with age. A young man with a farmer's calloused hands. Twin girls, perhaps 5 years old, holding each other and whimpering. A baby, fussing in its mother's arms, too young to understand anything but the tension in the air. We are going to kill them all. Captain Iwamoto strode into the courtyard, stopping before Tesshin. Where are the rest? We know you have 43 fugitives. 1 count fewer. Some of the men tried to flee last night, Tesshin said calmly. They were caught by your patrols. 7, I believe. Their bodies are probably still where they fell. Iwamoto grunted. 36 refugees, then. Plus your monks. This is everyone. This is everyone. You understand what happens now. Tesshin smiled, that same sad, knowing smile Shiro remembered from the night before. I understand that you have your orders. I understand that you believe you have no choice. I forgive you, Captain. I forgive all of you. Something flickered across Iwamoto's face, too fast to identify. Annoyance? Discomfort? Then it was gone, replaced by the stone mask of duty. Lord Morimoto offers you one final mercy, Iwamoto said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. The monk Tesshin and the leaders of the refugee group may take their own lives. In the samurai manner, it will be quicker, more dignified. The others will be executed. And if we refuse, then you will be executed with the rest. Tesshin turned to look at the people kneeling behind him, the frightened faces, the crying children, the men and women who had followed him here seeking sanctuary and found only death. We refuse, he said quietly. If we must die, we will die together. As we lived. Iwamoto nodded, as if he had expected nothing else. So be it. The captain turned to address his samurai. On my command, you will advance into the courtyard. You will execute every person present. Begin with the men, then the women, then the monks, the children. He paused almost imperceptibly. The children last. Show what mercy you can. What mercy you can." Shiro heard the words and understood their meaning. Make it quick. Don't let them suffer. As if speed were kindness. As if a fast death somehow erased the fact of murder. The samurai shifted into attack formation, a closing circle, swords ready to draw. Shiro found himself in the eastern quadrant, facing directly toward a cluster of women and children. The mother he had seen the night before was there. The child was awake now, perhaps 2 years old, looking around with confused curiosity. The mother held her close, whispering something into her hair. "I cannot do this." Shiro's hand rested on his sword grip. Around him, 99 other hands did the same. Iwamoto raised his arm. "For the honor of the Morimoto clan," he called out. "For our lord and our alliance, draw." The sound of 99 swords leaving their scabbards was like a single sharp breath, metal against wood, steel against leather, the voice of coming death. Shiro drew with the others. The weight of his father's blade was familiar in his hands. He had trained with this sword for 20 years, had cut practice targets and sparred with fellow samurai and learned every angle, every motion, every way to end a human life. He had never imagined using it like this advance. The circle began to close. Samurai stepped forward in unison, swords raised, moving toward the kneeling figures in the courtyard. Shiro stepped forward with them, one step or two, and then he stopped. 99 samurai advanced. One stood still. It was not a dramatic gesture. Shiro did not cry out or make a speech. He simply stopped walking, and his arms, raised with his sword above his shoulder, slowly came down. The blade lowered until its tip touched the ground. He stood there, motionless, while the others continued forward without him. A single break in the circle, a gap in the machinery of death. At first, no one noticed. The advance continued, the circle closing on the refugees, the first screams beginning to rise as the reality of what was happening became undeniable. Then the samurai beside him, Yamamoto, the one with the young daughter, faltered. "Takeda, Takeda, what are you doing?" Shiro didn't answer, couldn't answer. His voice had left him entirely. Yamamoto hesitated, caught between orders and confusion, then continued forward. But his step had broken, and now others were noticing the gap in their formation, the single man standing motionless while chaos erupted around him. Captain Iwamoto saw. His eyes found Shiro across the courtyard, and something dark crossed his face. "Takeda, advance immediately." Shiro heard the words, understood them, but his body would not obey. "I cannot do this." It was not courage that held him there. It was not principle or righteousness or any noble motivation. It was simply impossibility, the same impossibility of walking through a wall or breathing underwater. His arms would not rise. His legs would not move. Some essential mechanism had broken, and all the years of training and discipline and obedience could not repair it. The killing continued around him. He heard screams, pleas, the sound of blades meeting flesh. He saw figures fall at the edge of his vision, shadows of violence that his eyes refused to focus on. But he did not move. From the eastern ridge, Morimoto Kazuki watched the massacre unfold. His father stood beside him, face impassive, observing the operation like a general reviewing a battle. The advisors murmured among themselves, occasionally pointing out tactical details. The efficiency of the encirclement, the discipline of the samurai, the inevitable mathematics of overwhelming force. Kazuki saw none of that. He saw only the people dying. A man tried to run and was cut down after 3 steps. A woman threw herself over her children and fell with them still beneath her. An old monk knelt in prayer until the blade found him, his lips still moving as he collapsed. This is leadership. This is what my father wants me to learn. The taste of bile rose in his throat. He swallowed it down, clenching his jaw, determined not to show weakness before these men. Then he saw something that made him forget composure entirely. A samurai had stopped advancing. While all the others moved forward in their grim work, one man stood motionless at the edge of the courtyard, his sword pointed at the ground. Takeda Shiro. Even from this distance, Kazuki recognized him, the man whose stillness had caught his attention before dawn. Now that stillness had become something else, something that looked almost like refusal. "Father," Kazuki said, his voice rough. "That samurai, he's not advancing. Yasunaga followed his son's gaze. His expression flickered, surprise, then calculation, then something colder. Iwamoto will handle it. But, watch, his father said. This is part of the lesson. What happens when a samurai forgets his duty? Kazuki watched, and what he saw changed something inside him that he would spend years trying to understand. Captain Iwamoto strode toward Shiro, his own blade still clean. Commanders did not participate in the actual killing unless necessary. The massacre continued around them, but here, in this small space, time seemed to slow. Takeda Shiro, Iwamoto said, stopping 3 paces away. You have been given an order. You will obey it. Shiro raised his head. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. I cannot, Captain. Cannot or will not, both. Iwamoto's jaw tightened. You understand what happens to samurai who refuse orders in the field. I understand. You will be executed. Your family will be disgraced. Your father's name, everything he sacrificed to give you, will be erased. Shiro felt those words like physical blows. His father's name, his mother's security, everything. And still his arms would not rise. I understand, he said again. I accept the consequences. Why? Iwamoto demanded. The question seemed to escape him unwillingly, as if his own curiosity had betrayed his composure. Why throw everything away for peasants and monks you've never met? Shiro looked past the captain, toward the courtyard where the killing was already slowing, not enough targets left to maintain the initial frenzy. Bodies lay everywhere. The ground had turned dark with blood, but in one corner, a cluster of children still huddled together, temporarily protected by the chaos, overlooked in the initial assault. Because I've met them now, Shiro said quietly. Because I looked at them last night, really looked, and I cannot unsee what I saw. Because my father held a bridge alone so that I could stand here today. And I don't believe he did that so I could murder children. Your father followed orders. My father protected the helpless. That's what that battle was. That's what his sacrifice meant. Not blind obedience, protection. And if I betray that today, then everything he gave me becomes a lie. Iwamoto stared at him for a long moment. Something complex moved behind his eyes, something that might have been recognition, or memory, or simply the exhaustion of a man who had followed orders for too long. Then his expression hardened. You are a fool, Takeda. A fool and a traitor. He raised his sword. If this story is touching something in you, leave a like. It tells the algorithm that stories like this deserve to live. And if you wish to walk with us through more echoes of honor and sacrifice from old Japan, subscribe and join our community. The blade hung in the air between them. Shiro did not raise his sword to defend himself, did not flinch or beg or try to explain further. He simply stood there, waiting for the blow that would end his life. At least I will die having chosen. But the blow did not fall. A voice, high, terrified, cutting through the screams and chaos, rang out across the courtyard. Mama, Mama, wake up. Shiro turned. In the corner where the children had huddled, a small boy was shaking a woman's body, trying desperately to wake someone who would never wake again. The other children clustered around him, crying, frozen with shock. The killing had stopped. The samurai stood among the bodies, blood on their blades, looking at the children with expressions ranging from blank to something approaching discomfort. No one moved toward them. The order had been clear, children last. But now that the moment had arrived, the men hesitated. Captain Iwamoto lowered his sword, turning toward the scene. Finish it, he called out. Those are your orders. Complete the objective. Still, no one moved. One of the children, a girl, perhaps 6 years old, looked up from the cluster and met Shiro's eyes. There was no understanding in her gaze, no comprehension of what was happening. Just raw, animal terror. She will die in the next minute, unless someone acts. Shiro moved before the thought fully formed. He stepped between the children and the nearest samurai, positioning himself as a barrier, absurd. Suicidal, meaningless in any tactical sense. 1 man against 99. It changed nothing, and yet, you'll have to kill me first, he said. His voice was steady now, all fear burned away. If you want those children, you come through me. Iwamoto's face twisted with fury. Are you mad? You cannot stop us. You cannot save them. All you're doing is adding your own death to theirs. Then at it. On the ridge, Kazuki watched the lone samurai position himself before the children. He knows he can't win. He knows it changes nothing. And he's doing it anyway. His father's voice reached him as if from a great distance. A foolish gesture. Meaningless defiance. Iwamoto will cut him down, and the children will die regardless. Then why? Kazuki heard himself ask. Why do it at all? Yasunaga did not answer. Perhaps because he had no answer. Perhaps because he understood. On some level he refused to acknowledge that the question answered itself. Because some things matter more than success. Because sometimes all you can control is who you are when everything else is taken from you. Kazuki watched Shiro standing alone before certain death, and something cracked open inside him, some shell of acceptance he had been building all his life. I don't want to be the Lord who orders this. I don't want to inherit a domain purchased with children's blood. The thought was treason. The thought was weakness. The thought was everything his father had trained him never to think. And yet it was true. Captain Iwamoto advanced on Shiro, sword raised. The samurai around them watched in silence. The children whimpered behind Shiro's inadequate protection. The morning sun climbed higher, indifferent to the drama below. And then, something unexpected. Iwamoto stopped. His blade remained high, ready to fall, but his feet had ceased their forward motion. He stood perhaps to sword lengths from Shiro, and his face was no longer simply angry. It was conflicted. Damn you, Takeda, he said quietly. Damn you for making this complicated. It was always complicated, Shiro replied. We just agreed not to see it. If I let you live, if I don't complete this order, I'm as guilty as you. You understand that? You're not just condemning yourself. You're forcing everyone here to choose. I know. And you think that's fair? Putting that weight on men who just want to go home to their families. No, Shiro admitted. It's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. But I cannot raise my sword against children. And I don't believe you can either. Iwamoto's jaw clenched. His knuckles whitened on his sword grip. Behind him, the other samurai waited, watching, silent. Choose, their silence seemed to say. Show us what we should do. Because that's what commanders were for, wasn't it? Not just to give orders, but to model what honor looked like. To demonstrate, through their own actions, what the code demanded. And now, in this bloody courtyard, surrounded by the bodies of the innocent, the code's demands had become unbearable. The order was from Lord Morimoto himself, Iwamoto said. If I don't complete it, then tell him I stopped you. Tell him I went mad, that I threatened the operation, that you had to deal with me first. Tell him whatever you need to, but let the children go. And the monks, the women who survived. Shiro looked around the courtyard, quickly assessing. Most of the refugees were dead, but a handful still lived, wounded, cowering, waiting for the end. Perhaps a dozen people in total, including the children. Then too, all of them. Let them disappear into the mountains. In a week, this will be a burned temple and scattered ashes. Who will know the difference? Lord Yuchi will know. He'll demand proof. Then give him proof. Kill me. Send him my head instead of the monks. Tell him I was a traitor who interfered with the mission, who let the fugitives escape. He gets his blood, you get your explanation, and 12 people get to live. Iwamoto stared at him. You would die for this? Trade your life for peasants and orphans? Shiro thought of his father, holding a bridge alone while enemies swarmed around him. Thought of Tesshin, choosing death over betrayal. Thought of the girl with terrified eyes who might, if someone acted, see another sunrise. I would die knowing I chose, he said. That's more than most people get. The silence stretched like a held breath. Iwamoto stood motionless, sword still raised, caught between duty and something older, something that existed before codes and lords and the machinery of obedience. The other samurai watched. The survivors watched. The dead watched with their empty eyes. And in that suspended moment, something shifted in Captain Iwamoto's face. Not dramatically, not visibly, just a small loosening around the eyes, a slight drop in the shoulders. The posture of a man setting down a weight he had carried too long. All of you, he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Secure the perimeter. No one enters, no one leaves until I give the order." The samurai moved to obey, confusion evident in their hesitation. This was not the expected command. Iwamoto lowered his sword, turned to face Shiro directly. "You understand that I should kill you where you stand? Yes, you understand that what you're asking, what you're forcing me to consider, is betrayal of everything I've served for 30 years. Yes, then why?" The question was almost plaintive now. "Why can't you just be the enemy I need you to be? Why can't you be wrong, so I can be right?" Shiro had no answer. Or rather, the answer was too simple for words. "Because you're not wrong either. Because we're both trapped in the same system, following the same code, doing what we were taught to do, and because someone has to stop first." Iwamoto turned away, looking at the carnage around them. The bodies, the blood, the broken temple that had offered shelter to the desperate. "I have served lords for 3 decades, he said quietly, "good lords and bad lords. I have killed on command and watched others die on command and told myself it was duty. It was honor, it was the way things must be." He paused. "Today I killed children's parents in front of them, watched my men cut down women who begged for their lives, and I felt nothing, because I had decided beforehand that feeling was not permitted." His voice hardened. "Your father, the Ashigaru who held the bridge, I was there that day. Did you know that? I was young, just a foot soldier myself, fleeing with everyone else, and I saw him stand alone against impossible odds because someone had to." Shiro's breath caught. He didn't do it because he was ordered to. He did it because there were people behind him who would die if he ran. He chose the way you're choosing now. Iwamoto turned back to face him. "Take the children. Take whoever still breathes. Get them into the mountains before I remember what I'm supposed to do." It happened quickly, in the chaos and confusion that followed. Shiro gathered the survivors, 11 people in total, 7 children, 3 wounded women, and Tesshin himself, who had somehow remained alive despite a deep cut across his arm. "The western path," Tesshin whispered as Shiro helped him stand. "There are caves 2 hours into the mountains. Supplies hidden there. I prepared. I hoped someone might." His voice faltered. The old monk looked around at the destruction of his temple, the bodies of those he had tried to protect, and something in his face collapsed. "I'm sorry," Shiro said. "I couldn't save them all." Tesshin gripped his arm with surprising strength. "You saved who you could. That's all any of us can do." They moved quickly, slipping through the gap in the samurai line that Iwamoto had quietly arranged. The children followed in terrified silence, too shocked for tears now, simply moving because they were told to move. Behind them, the temple began to burn. Iwamoto had given that order at least, smoke rising into the morning sky. Proof that something had happened here. Proof that could be interpreted as Lord Yuchi required. What story the captain would tell, Shiro didn't know. Perhaps the truth, perhaps a useful lie, perhaps something in between. It didn't matter. What mattered was the small hand gripping his, the girl with terrified eyes, now looking up at him with something that might have been trust. "You're alive. Against all odds, against all logic, you're alive. Now stay that way." From the ridge, Lord Morimoto watched the smoke rise from Renshō-ji. His face betrayed nothing, but beside him, Kazuki could see the tension in his father's shoulders, the subtle tightening of his jaw. Something went wrong, one of the advisors murmured. The formation broke. There was some kind of disturbance. "I saw," Yasunaga said. "The samurai who stopped advancing, Takeda. Should we?" "I saw." The smoke climbed higher. Somewhere inside that column of ash and cinder, a temple was dying. Whatever had happened in the courtyard was over now, but Kazuki knew it wasn't over. Not really. Father saw what I saw. A man choosing to stop, a gap in the machinery, a crack in the system he's built his whole life on. He thought of the children he had watched huddling in the corner, thought of the brief, desperate standoff he couldn't quite follow from this distance, thought of the smoke that might be rising from bodies, or might be rising from something else. "The samurai," Kazuki said carefully, "Takeda. What will happen to him?" His father was silent for a long moment. "That depends," Yasunaga finally said, "on what Captain Iwamoto reports. And if he reports treason, Then Takeda will be executed as a traitor, his family disgraced, his name erased, and if he reports something else. Yasunaga turned to look at his son. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a question, perhaps. Why do you ask? Kazuki thought of many things to say, thought of lessons about leadership and necessity and the hard choices of rule, thought of everything his father had tried to teach him. Then he thought of a single samurai lowering his sword because he couldn't do otherwise. Because I want to understand, Kazuki said slowly, what kind of domain I'm going to inherit, and what kind of lord I'm going to be. Yasunaga studied his son for a long moment. Something passed between them, not understanding, not yet, but the beginning of a conversation that would continue for years. An interesting question, the Lord finally said. Perhaps we'll discuss it on the ride home. He turned his horse toward the castle, and Kazuki followed. Behind them, the smoke continued to rise, the only witness to what had truly happened at Renshō-ji, and the only one that would never speak. They walked for 3 hours through dense forest, following trails that barely existed. Tesshin led despite his wound, his feet finding paths invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 30 years in these mountains. The children moved in exhausted silence, too drained for tears, too shocked to complain. The 3 surviving women carried the youngest, a boy of perhaps 2 who had fallen asleep against one woman's shoulder, mercifully unaware of the world he had woken into. Shiro brought up the rear, his sword drawn, listening for pursuit that never came. Iwamoto kept his word. Or at least, he hasn't sent anyone yet. The thought brought no comfort. Every step away from the temple was a step deeper into an unknown future. He had saved 11 lives, but destroyed his own in the process. Mother, what will happen to her when they come for me? He pushed the thought away. There would be time for grief later. Now, there was only the path, the survivors, the simple imperative of putting distance between them and the burning temple. The caves appeared suddenly, a dark mouth in the hillside, hidden by overgrown brush and a carefully positioned boulder. Tesshin pushed aside the vegetation to reveal an entrance, just large enough for a person to slip through. Inside, he said, quickly. One by one, the survivors filed into darkness. The cave was larger than it appeared from outside, a network of chambers carved by ancient water, now dry and surprisingly warm. Tesshin lit a small oil lamp, revealing supplies stacked along the walls, rice, dried vegetables, blankets, medical supplies. You prepared for this, Shiro said. I prepared for the possibility. Tesshin lowered himself onto a stone ledge, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. When you shelter fugitives, you learn to plan for the worst. I hoped we would never need this place. I hoped many things. His voice trailed off. In the lamplight, he looked every one of his 60 years, an old man watching the destruction of everything he had built. The women were already tending to the children, wrapping them in blankets, offering water, murmuring comfort that could not possibly be adequate. The girl who had met Shiro's eyes in the courtyard, he learned her name was Yuki, sat apart from the others, staring at nothing. She watched her mother die. They all watched their parents die. Shiro knelt beside Tesshin. Your wound needs treatment. It can wait, no doubt it can't. He found bandages among the supplies and began cleaning the cut on Tesshin's arm. The old monk watched him work with quiet curiosity. You should not have stayed, Tesshin said. After I sent you back last night, you should have done your duty and lived. I tried. Shiro wrapped the bandage carefully, avoiding the monk's eyes. My body wouldn't obey. That's not a small thing. To have your body refuse what your mind has accepted. That's the soul speaking louder than training. Or cowardice, no. Tesshin's voice was firm. Cowardice would have been easier. Cowardice is obedience. What you did required courage of a kind most men never discover they possess. Shiro finished the bandage and sat back. What I did was condemn my mother to disgrace. My father's name will be erased. Everything he sacrificed was sacrificed so you could become who you are. Tesshin interrupted gently. And who you are is a man who chose children's lives over his own advancement. Do you truly believe your father would be ashamed of that? Shiro had no answer. The question cut too close to things he couldn't bear to examine. Rest now, Tesshin said. All of you. We'll need strength for what comes next. What does come next? That depends on what happens at the castle, and on what kind of story Captain Iwamoto decides to tell. Captain Iwamoto arrived at Morimoto Castle as the sun reached its zenith. He walked alone through the main gate, his armor still bearing traces of blood and ash. The guards watched him pass with expressions of careful neutrality. They had heard the smoke was rising from Renshō-ji, but details remained scarce. Lord Morimoto received him in the private study where, just days before, he had read Lord Yuchi's demand. Report. Iwamoto knelt in formal position, his eyes fixed on the floor. Renshō-ji has been destroyed, my lord. The temple burned. The monk Tesshin is dead. The refugees eliminated. A pause. Morimoto studied his captain with the careful attention of a man who had survived decades of political maneuvering. All of them? All that we found, my lord. Some had apparently fled before our arrival. 7 were caught by patrols during the night. The rest? Iwamoto hesitated, choosing his words with precision. The rest may have escaped through mountain paths unknown to us. The terrain was difficult. Pursuit was impractical. The silence stretched between them. Morimoto was no fool. He had built his domain on the ability to read what men left unsaid. And right now, his most trusted captain was saying a great deal without speaking at all. How many escaped? Perhaps a dozen. Women and children, mostly, of no political significance. And Takeda Shiro, Iwamoto's composure flickered, barely visible, but there. Takeda showed signs of instability during the operation. He has been removed from active duty. Removed how? He fled, my lord. During the confusion of the assault, I believe he may have aided some of the refugees in their escape. Morimoto leaned back, his expression unreadable. So, my samurai betrayed me, aided my enemies, and escaped with fugitives who will spread word of what happened today across every province they touch. With respect, my lord, word of what? A temple that sheltered traitors was destroyed. The monk who defied you is dead. Lord Yuchi will receive his ashes and his proof. The details of how the operation proceeded need not concern anyone beyond this room. You're asking me to cover treason. I'm asking you to consider what story serves your interests best. Iwamoto raised his eyes for the first time. If Takeda is declared a traitor, there will be investigations. Questions about how one man could disrupt an operation involving 100 samurai. Questions about why the survivors weren't pursued more vigorously. Questions that benefit no one. And if he simply disappeared, then he becomes a footnote. A troubled samurai who abandoned his post. Shameful, but not significant. His mother can be quietly provided for. The matter can be closed. Morimoto was silent for a long moment. You're protecting him. It wasn't a question. Iwamoto met his lord's gaze steadily. I'm protecting the clan. Takeda made a choice that I cannot entirely condemn. He saw something in that courtyard that broke something inside him. Perhaps it would have broken any of us if we had let ourselves see it. The children. Yes, my lord. The children. Another silence. Somewhere in the castle, a servant dropped something. The sound echoing faintly through the corridors. You've served me for 30 years, Morimoto finally said. In all that time, you've never once questioned an order. No, my lord. Why now? Iwamoto considered the question, considered all the easy answers he could give. Tactical reasoning, political calculation, practical concerns about morale. Instead, he told the truth. Because I'm tired, my lord. Tired of pretending that what we do is always honorable simply because we're the ones doing it. Tired of watching young men destroy themselves to preserve structures that care nothing for them. He paused. Takeda reminded me of something I had forgotten, or perhaps something I had chosen to forget. What? That we always have a choice, even when we pretend we don't. After Iwamoto left, Morimoto sat alone in his study for a long time. The report lay before him, incomplete, carefully worded, offering him a path through the political wreckage of the morning. Take it, and the matter could be closed. Takeda becomes a disgrace rather than a martyr. The survivors fade into the mountains. Lord Yuchi receives his proof of loyalty, and the alliance holds. The cost a lie, one among thousands that formed the foundation of his rule. What's one more? But something troubled him. Something in Iwamoto's eyes when he spoke of Takeda, of the children, of choices. His most reliable captain, the man who had never questioned anything, had looked at him today with an expression approaching disappointment. He expected me to be better, or perhaps he hoped I could be. Morimoto thought of his own father, a harsh man, practical above all else, who had taught him that sentiment was weakness and power the only virtue. Under that teaching, Morimoto had built a domain that survived while others crumbled, had protected his people through alliances and calculated sacrifices, had done what was necessary, always, without allowing himself the luxury of doubt. And yet today a samurai of no particular importance had lowered his sword and chosen death over obedience, had valued the lives of peasant children over his own name, his family's honor, his entire future. He saw something I couldn't afford to see, felt something I couldn't afford to feel. Was he wrong, or was he simply braver than the rest of us? There were no answers. There never were, not for questions like these. Only choices and consequences, and the long process of living with both. Morimoto picked up his brush and began writing orders. Takeda Shiro would be listed as having abandoned his post, dishonorable, but not treasonous. His mother would receive a small pension, enough to live on, delivered anonymously. The survivors of Renshō-ji would not be pursued. It was not justice. It was not even particularly moral. But it was, perhaps, the closest thing to mercy that a man in his position could offer. That evening, Kazuki found his father in the garden, staring at the koi pond. The Lord did not acknowledge his son's approach. He simply stood there, motionless, watching the fish circle in their eternal patterns. "Father, I used to come here when I was your age," Morimoto said. "After my father made decisions I didn't understand. I would watch the koi and wonder how they could be so calm, so content, swimming in circles they could never escape." Kazuki stood beside him, uncertain what to say. "Today I killed 40 people to preserve an alliance," Morimoto continued. 40 people who had done nothing except flee attacks they couldn't pay. Farmers and merchants and children who wanted only to live. The order came from Lord Yuchi. You had no choice. That's what I told myself. Morimoto turned to look at his son. It's what I've always told myself. No choice. Necessity. The hard requirements of leadership. Isn't it true? I don't know anymore. The Lord's voice was heavy. A samurai today showed me something. He refused an order he found intolerable, knowing it would cost him everything. He chose Kazuki. When everyone around him insisted there was no choice, he found one anyway. Takeda, you saw him. From the ridge, I saw. Kazuki hesitated. I thought he was a fool. And now, the question hung between them. Kazuki thought of the lone figure standing before the children, sword lowered, waiting for death. Thought of the gap in the formation, the single break in the machinery of obedience. Now I think he was the only one who remembered what the code was supposed to mean. Not obedience for its own sake. Protection of the helpless. Courage to do what's right even when it's costly. Morimoto nodded slowly. When you inherit this domain, and you will, perhaps sooner than you're ready, remember today. Remember that systems demand terrible things from us, and that we always have the choice to refuse. The price of refusal may be high. It may be higher than we can bear. But the price of compliance. He paused. The price of compliance is becoming someone who can watch children die and feel nothing. Father, I've paid that price. Kazuki, for 30 years, I've paid it. And I'm not sure anymore what I bought with it. They stood together in silence, watching the koi circle, as the sun sank toward the western mountains and the shadows grew long across the garden. In the hidden cave, Shiro sat at the entrance, watching darkness descend over the mountains. Behind him, the survivors had finally found sleep, children curled together for warmth, women keeping exhausted watch, Tesshin breathing slowly through whatever dreams troubled him. 11 people. That's what I bought with my name, my honor, my future. Is it enough? He didn't know. Couldn't know. The calculus of such things was beyond human accounting. What he knew was this. Somewhere in the valley below, the temple was ashes. 39 people who had trusted Tesshin's protection were dead. His own mother would wake tomorrow to news that would destroy her, her son a disgrace, her husband's legacy tarnished. I should feel regret. I should wish I had acted differently. But when he searched inside himself, he found no regret, only a strange, exhausted peace. I chose. Whatever happens now, I chose. Small footsteps behind him. He turned to find Yuki, the girl with terrified eyes, standing a few feet away, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. I can't sleep, she said quietly. Shiro gestured to the space beside him. She settled there, tucking her knees to her chest, staring out at the darkening forest. My mother is dead, she said. It wasn't a question or a complaint, just a statement of fact, delivered with the brutal clarity of a child who has seen too much to pretend. Yes, she told me to be brave. When the men came, she said to be brave and stay quiet and maybe. Her voice caught. She said maybe someone would help us. Shiro's throat tightened. I'm sorry I couldn't help her. You helped me. Yuki looked at him, really looked, the way children do when they're trying to understand something important. Why? Why? Such a simple question. Such an impossible answer. Because. Shiro searched for words that would make sense to a child. Because some things are more important than orders. More important than what people expect us to do. And protecting children, protecting you, that's one of those things. But you're in trouble now. The other samurai want to hurt you. Probably. And you helped us anyway. Yes. Yuki was silent for a moment, processing this. Then, with the devastating directness of the young, that's stupid. Despite everything, the horror of the day, the uncertainty of tomorrow, the weight of all he had lost, Shiro found himself smiling. Maybe, but it's the kind of stupid I can live with. Yuki leaned against his arm, a small warmth in the growing cold. Thank you, she said quietly, for being stupid. They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, above the mountains. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at the Takeda residence. Shiro's mother, Hane, had aged a decade since the news came. She moved through the small house like a ghost, preparing meals no one would eat, cleaning rooms that needed no cleaning, waiting for the final blow to fall. The letter bore no seal, no identifying marks, just her name, brushed in an unfamiliar hand. She opened it with trembling fingers. Takeda Hane, your son lives. He has found shelter in the northern mountains with those he protected. He cannot return, and he cannot contact you directly, but he wishes you to know that he is well, and that he does not regret his choice. Enclosed you will find documents transferring a small property to your name, a gift from an anonymous benefactor who believes that honor should not cost a mother her home. Your son asked me to tell you this. His father held a bridge so that others might live. He hopes, in some small way, he has done the same. Do not seek him. Do not speak of this letter, but know that he thinks of you, and that he will carry your love with him wherever the road leads. Hane read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it into the sleeve of her kimono, and walked to the small shrine where her husband's memorial tablet rested. She knelt there for a long time, speaking words that no one else would ever hear. When she finally rose, there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. If this story moved you, leave a like. It tells the algorithm that tales like this deserve to live on. And if you wish to walk with us through more echoes of honor, sacrifice, and the courage to choose, subscribe and join our community. Morimoto Kazuki became Daimyo at the age of 32, after his father succumbed to a long illness that had slowly drained the strength of a man. Once feared for his clarity and severity, the domain Kazuki inherited was orderly and prosperous, held together by alliances his father had negotiated with precision. It was a realm built on necessity, on calculations of power, on choices made without room for hesitation. Kazuki ruled differently. His changes were subtle at first, small adjustments that did not challenge the structure of the world but softened its edges. During a harsh winter, he quietly reduced the rice tax across 3 villages so families could survive until spring, when a headman protested an unreasonable labor request from a corrupt overseer. Kazuki spared him from punishment and removed the overseer instead. And on rare occasions, when cases of abuse of authority reached his ears, he allowed petitions to be heard directly at the castle, something his father would never have tolerated. The older retainers whispered that mercy was a dangerous luxury, They warned that power, once softened, could not easily be reforged. Kazuki listened, but he did not bend, because he remembered a morning 15 years earlier, when a single samurai had lowered his sword while 99 others raised theirs. That moment had split something inside him, revealing a truth he had not known he was capable of seeing. He had learned that systems endure only because people choose to maintain them. And sometimes, all it takes to change the course of a life is a single person who refuses. He often returned to the same thought: I will not be the lord who orders children killed. Kazuki was not a revolutionary. He did not dismantle the hierarchies his father had spent decades reinforcing. He did not challenge the deeper order of the age, but he made space for compassion within the rigid walls he inherited. And though these acts were small, the intent behind them changed the way he carried authority. On the 15th anniversary of the destruction of Renshō-ji, Kazuki rode alone into the mountains. No attendants, no guards, only the quiet path, known to few, that wound through cedar forests and hidden ravines until it reached a small settlement. That did not appear on any official map. The villagers called it simply home. 47 people lived there now, born from the 11 who had escaped the fire that consumed the temple. They farmed narrow terraces carved into the mountainside, raised goats, tended small gardens, and lived with a peaceful anonymity that had once seemed impossible. Tesshin, the monk who had defied a lord, had died peacefully 3 years earlier. His grave overlooked the valley he had protected with his final act of resistance, marked only by a simple stone with no name. And Takeda Shiro, who no longer bore the name he had sacrificed, had become the village's guardian and teacher. Kazuki found him at the edge of the settlement, instructing a group of young students in the art of the sword. Among them was a young woman moving with ease and clarity. Yuki, now grown. The last memory he held of her was of a terrified child huddled behind Shiro's legs. When Shiro noticed Kazuki, he stopped the lesson, and the children sensed the change in the air, retreating with a quiet respect. Kazuki approached slowly. Takeda Shiro. That name no longer belongs to me, Shiro replied. I left it behind with the life that required it. Kazuki nodded. Then I will call you only Shiro. They faced each other for a moment, two men bound by a memory neither could forget. I have known about this village for a long time, Kazuki said. Not every scout my father sent was as loyal as he believed. Some things reach a lord's ears even when they are inconvenient. Shiro's expression remained calm. We wondered why your patrols always turned away. Because I gave the order that they should. Whatever else happened 15 years ago, I was not willing to let this place be undone. Why? Shiro asked. Kazuki drew a slow breath. Because I saw you that morning. I saw you choose death rather than compliance. And for 15 years, I have lived with the question you left me. What is the worth of honor if it demands we become instruments of cruelty? The children, drawn by curiosity, had quietly gathered again. Yuki stood among them, watchful. Shiro asked, and what answer did you find? Only that the question must be asked, again and again, and that a lord is shaped by how often he is willing to ask it. They spoke of the alliance with the Ouchi clan, now altered under new leadership. They spoke of the ruins of Renshō-ji, where Kazuki had authorized the construction of a small rest shelter for travelers. They spoke of Tesshin. Kazuki eventually said, I came because I want to ask you for something. Shiro waited. I want you to return to the domain, not as a samurai of the castle, but as a teacher, someone who can guide young warriors before they become men who stop asking questions. Shiro studied him carefully. You would have me teach them to disobey. I would have you teach them to think. There is courage in following a just order, but there is also courage in refusing an unjust one. If they learn the difference, this domain will be stronger than any polished regiment my father forged. Shiro considered the offer in silence. He thought of Tesshin's grave. He thought of the children who now bore swords as tools of discipline, rather than instruments of fear. He thought of the 11 lives he had saved and all the lives that had grown from them. I will consider teaching, he finally said, but only if this village is given official protection. No more secrecy, no more fear of a passing patrol. These people deserve to live without looking over their shoulders. Kazuki extended his hand in agreement. It will be done. Shiro did not take back his old name. "That man died at Renshō-ji," he said. "Let him rest. Then what shall I call you?" He looked toward Tesshin's grave, toward the valley that had sheltered them all. "Tesshin," he said. "Call me Tesshin." On his way back to the castle, Kazuki passed a small shrine newly built along the mountain path. Someone had placed an old sword beside a simple statue of Buddha. Carved into the wood were words that made him stop and bow his head. "For those who choose when choice seems impossible, and for those who will." Kazuki rode on as dusk fell, carrying with him the quiet certainty that the domain he governed would never again be shaped by necessity alone. In the mountains behind him, a village that should not have survived continued to thrive. It stood as proof that history does not change through decrees or grand victories, but through the fragile courage of those who, for one fleeting moment, refuse to let the world be what it has always been. This is the story of 100 samurai who surrounded a temple at dawn. 99 obeyed without hesitation, as tradition had shaped them to do. One lowered his sword, not out of heroism, but because something within him whispered that he was still human. This is not a tale of triumph. The temple still burned, and most who sought shelter there died. The system that demanded their deaths remained intact, barely disturbed by a single act of defiance. But 11 lives endured when they were meant to end, and a young heir learned a truth his father never taught him. In the mountains, a hidden village slowly grew where despair should have taken root. This is how the world shifts, through quiet refusals, small mercies, choices made in moments that seem insignificant. Takeda Shiro was not extraordinary. He simply thought before he obeyed, and in that thought, he discovered a truth the system fears. Choice never disappears, even when obedience is demanded. If your heart is still open for one more tale, follow the card on your screen. I've chosen another journey that pairs beautifully with this one. Whenever you're ready, I'll be waiting in the next story.